Today we're going to tie up a double Dutch bug. This is a Umpqua pattern that I'm not able to buy anymore. I'm not sure if they completely discontinued it, and I have not been able to find any tutorial videos or step-by-steps online. So I sort of reverse engineered this fly and threw together this video for you. So I'm starting off here with a Tiemco 5212 in size 8. These are great in like size 8 and 10, large attractor. I'm tying it with Uni-Thread in 6/0 olive dun. Just kind of get my thread started here. Then I'm going to wrap all the way back to the very bend of the hook. Crimp my barb. I always do that in the vise so that I don't forget. And then I advance my thread back to about the 2/3 point. At this point I'm going to tie in a foam cylinder, and this foam cylinder is going to have the parachute hackle tied to it eventually, but it's important to tie it on right now. I discovered that by tying this fly about a half a dozen times terribly until I figured out a better order for the steps. It may not be perfect and optimal yet. I'm sure you can improve upon it, but this works. So I'm going to tie that down to the hook shank. I'm going to tie it almost all the way back to the bend, and then clip it off real tight, pull tight, clip it off real short. And then I'm going to finish my thread around that. I'm going to wrap it back over it a couple times to really get it cinched down tight to the hook, and then build up a nice little thread ramp to even things out right to the bend of the hook. Okay, I'm using ginger rabbit dubbing. I'm tying it particularly to look like golden stonefly, a golden stonefly pattern, because golden stones are very active in the area that I really like to fish this fly during the summer. These work great as squallows if you go with like an olive dubbing. Just mix up your dubbing colors and your foam colors, and you can do all kinds of variations on this pattern. I'm just going to get a nice tight dubbing noodle and wrap it forward to the foam and then back. So you'll notice that even though I used a thin noodle, that I dubbed it fairly thick because I want it to have a bit of bulk underneath of the foam that I'm about to tie in. It doesn't need to be buggy. You can leave it buggy. I'm just kind of trimming it up. I don't know, it works great either way. So this is brown and golden yellow foam glued together. I glued together a whole sheet of each, and then I just cut off little slices that are about the width of the hook gape. Then I kind of trimmed the corners off on that at about a 45-degree angle towards the tail. I do about 3 or 4 real tight wraps to secure it right at the hook bend, and then I segment over the top of the body with several more wraps. Once I get that final segmentation wrap wrapped into there, I'm going to go ahead and trim off the excess, sort of liberally trim off the excess. I'll trim it down a little bit further to reduce bulk in a sec here. But I learned the hard way that it's pretty easy to overdo it and like cut my thread or have it slip out of there. So I'm going to go ahead and secure it pretty solidly with several wraps at the front as well. And before I do anything else, I'm going to tie in the legs, the first set of legs. Like I said, I kind of reverse engineered this fly. And I would not say that I've mastered it at this point. It's still kind of a difficult tie for me, but I think these are reasonable steps. So kind of trim it up, reduce bulk, and then I'm going to take my first set of legs. It's a Montana Fly Company brown Centipede legs, and I tie in on one side about the length that I want facing back with the long side forward, and then I'm going to go ahead and loop it around the front of the fly and tie it in on the other side. Helps me to get it fairly even and about the length that I want those legs. Once I've got it tied in and positioned like that, then I'm going to go ahead and pull up that front loop and trim it right in the center. I'll kind of even up the length on these guys before I go forward. I'll make sure the position's good on those legs before I really lock them down. Okay, so we're going to tie in the underwing, which is really going to be the part that's visible to the trout. So I'm going to use some Sculpin olive deer hair for this. I've also used olive elk hair. Both work fine. I think the deer hair kind of splays a bit more when I tie it in, even if I do fairly soft wraps on it. And for this pattern, I don't mind a little bit of sort of that fluttering splayed wing look. So I'm going to clean up the cut ends on this, and comb out some of the underfur, hopefully all the underfur, get it nice and clean, and then I'm going to put these guys in a hair stacker as usual. Doesn't have to be a huge wing. Don't overdo the materials. So even up the tips in my stacker and pull that out, and I'm going to want the wing to be about to the end of the body, to the length of the body. A little bit tricky to tie in these wings with rubber legs in the way, so I kind of pull those rubber legs back with the wing. Get a couple of loose wraps to begin with over it so it doesn't flare too much. And then I'm going to do the trick that I learned from Fly Fish Food with elk hair caddis and kind of hide my additional wraps that are also really going to lock down that wing so it doesn't spin on the hook for me. So you notice how I kind of just wrap forward through the flared end pieces of hair. Then I get a couple good wraps in front of it. Once I've done that, I'm just going to go in with my scissors and trim out all the blunt ends. Okay, so now that we've got the underwing tied in, we're going to take some light orange or orange polypropylene floating yarn, and I'm actually going to get a fairly good length of this because I'm going to double it over. You'll see that in a moment, and tie that in as just sort of a visibility sort of indicator on top of the fly so that it's easy to see when you're fishing it. So I'll double that. And I'd like to tie these in so that the doubled part is sort of facing back. And I'll go ahead and clip it when I'm all done with the fly, but it keeps it a little bit neater while I'm tying. I'll get some solid wraps over that, tie on the tie-in point there. 4 or 5 wraps, and then I'll pull the excess up and trim it off. Doing my best not to trim off the foam post while I'm at it. All right, it's starting to look somewhat like a double Dutch bug now. So we're only about halfway through the video, you notice, and it looks like the fly's almost done. That's because the it gets a little bit more difficult. I have trouble with this fly. For a lot of bugs, I like to sort of go with a slightly darker thorax color than my abdomen, but for golden stones, they're pretty consistently colored from front to back. So I'm going to keep going with the ginger rabbit as my golden stone-ish color. I'm going to get a couple wraps of that over the right in front of the wing, but behind the foam post. And then I'm going to tie in my second set of legs. I'm going to use the same methodology where I tie in, to approximately the length that I want facing back, and then I'll loop it around the front of the fly again, like I did before. And get the positioning right on it before I really lock it down and trim it. Even though I've got a few wraps, 3-4 wraps over that, I'm going to pull a little bit to get the length more correct. I'll trim it at the center. Before I go any further, I go ahead and I get out the hackle that I'm going to use. In this particular case, I'm using dark Brassy dun hackle. But, I mean, you can tie this kind of like an Adams in terms of hackle color, where you go with like grizzly and brown, or you can use Cree if you've got it. The hackle color really is up to you, and it depends on the color variation that you're tying, what you're really trying to imitate with this general attractor. I think this would look really good with some Cree. I get a few wraps around the post, you'll notice there, and it sort of helps to prop up that post before I tie in the hackle stem. Now I'm tying in the hackle stem now so that it's sitting there waiting to be wrapped after I've put on my next layer of dubbing that is sort of the finishing part of the fly. So now I've got my hackle ready to be wrapped. Those legs are kind of hard to pull out of the way sometimes. Get it nice and solidly secured to the hook. Trim off the excess bit of stem right there. And then I'm going to grab myself some more ginger rabbit and finish out the head on this fly before I wrap the hackle. So it doesn't have to be a super tight dubbing loop here. I do go ahead and use my rotary feature. I kind of just use the rotary feature when it seems appropriate, when it makes things easier. Because I've got so many different materials up in there now, it sort of helped to get the first wrap or two with the rotary. So couple wraps behind the foam post to give it a, not quite to my liking, give it more of a finished look. And then I'm going to put a little bit of dubbing in front of the foam post. Looks like I'm building up a little bit of a thread dam to help prop up that foam post a little bit more. And just a touch more dubbing. One more thin little noodle. I'll go ahead and start it behind the post again. But then the last wrap or two I'm going to put in front of the post to just sort of finish it off. Or 3 or 4 or 5. Okay. Now you'll notice that I tied in the stem of that hackle so that there's a bit of stem sticking up, and that allows me to bend it at 90 degrees before I start wrapping. I got to kind of pull the legs out of the way with each turn. God, there's got to be a better way to do this. But I pull a leg out of the way and then turn past it and then come around and pull a leg out of the way again. Turn past that, pull the next leg out of the way, etc. I think I start getting impatient after about 3 or 4 wraps here and just finish it off and go, that's enough. Now it's real easy to trap way too many fibers when you're finishing, coming around with your thread to secure that hackle. So I'm using another trick that I picked up from Flyfish Food, where you'll see I come around the underside of the hackle instead of coming over the hook eye. And I secure it by wrapping around the post underneath of the hackle. And then I'm going to do that one more time to make sure it's nice and secure before I finish off the head. I don't think I've shown it real well here, but if you watch the Flyfish Food YouTube video on tying, I think it's probably on their Parachute Atoms or something, they talk about that technique. And they don't even... on that, they'll whip finish around that post and just finish it and be done and not even do a head on it. On this particular fly, I felt like it was a little more finished looking and that it was going to be more resilient, put up to more fish chewing on it if I went ahead and put a little bit of a head on it and whip finished it in more of a classic style. There's just, again, a boatload of materials up front there that can be easily trapped. So I'm pulling those back with my fingers so that I can get some wraps around to finish off that head. Pardon my fingers being in the way. Again, it's just me securing all of that material back so that I have the head exposed and I can get some wraps on it. And then comes the fun of whip finishing without trapping materials. So you can do it, you just got to be real careful and kind of get your angles right. That's just 2-turn whip finish. That's not going to do much, but then I do one more 3-turn whip finish, and I think that's going to be nice and solid and put up with some fish chewing on it. Again, just tons of material up there, so I can't do like, the speed whip finish that I would like to do. It's like, okay, carefully get some wraps on there and trim it off. Cool. So now the fly is essentially done. Just needs a little bit of trimming here. So we're going to trim off the white foam post. And then I'm going to take the orange poly yarn that I left doubled. And I'm going to go ahead and clip the center of that so that it frees up and splays out a little bit more. You can just leave it if you want to. That's more like the Umpqua pattern though, if you trim it off. I mean, if you split it. There you go. That is the double Dutch bug. And like I said over and over during this video, it is not an easy tie. That's why I bought a whole bunch of these at the shop, because I don't particularly like tying them, but I can't buy them anymore.